Hey there guys, welcome back to yet another video. So the last time I seen you, I told you I was going to discuss my spare engine block here. So we're going to talk about that today. Let's do it. And here it is, our spare engine block. What is its purpose? Well, I'll say right off the bat. This block is for boost, guys. I'm going back to my roots of turbocharging once our engine in this car decides to implode due to hard driving, as this car will be spiritually driven very hard. It currently, as it sits, is 2.8 liter with 3.0 bolt-ons, F54B30 intake camshaft, 3.0 intake manifold, X5 throttle body, X5 intake piping, MS43 swapped, all kinds of cool stuff. However, it's inevitable with my driving habits and this engine, obviously the bottom end just being thrown in and not being fully rebuilt bearing-wise, it's going to fail, because I do drive things hard, especially this car. This is my baby. This is my race car, so it's going to be driven super hard. Wherever she goes, we're going to go back to boost. You guys like that content. I love doing the content for you. I, however, do appreciate a high horsepower, naturally aspirated, high revving engine. I love that stuff. I just love boost because it's cheaper than building an NA engine. Building a high horsepower NA engine for these cars is pretty freaking expensive when you can slap in about 9 psi and make over 100 horsepower from stock. That's the next example. This car, when it was turbocharged all those years ago, I only ran 9 psi through her throat. It was a stock F52 TUB25, meaning it had roughly 170 horsepower from factory, and with 9 psi, it made roughly 340 crank. That's over 100 horsepower with 9 psi. That was with stock intake manifold and everything. Now, my demise was not the engine giving up. It was my fault for using the wrong size wastegate. I was still learning. I use a 38 millimeter wastegate. I should have been using at least a 44. You use too small of a wastegate, and under heavy acceleration and high RPMs, the wastegate could be fully open and it still will not allow enough exhaust gases to escape, resulting in your turbocharger still building boost. So I crept past 14 psi with the wrong size wastegate, and what happened was I cracked a ringland. Now, people were asking me in the past, what's a ringland? So here's a piston, right? Whenever you overboost your engine, and if it's not tuned for that, you rapidly raise the temperature in your combustion chambers, okay? And we all know heat will swell metal. So what causes a ringland failure is, here's your piston ring, right? Whenever these pistons are seated in the bores, these rings are obviously, they're compressed some to fit into the cylinder. Now, a stock ring gap is going to be probably about, I'm trying to get a good squeeze on this, probably about right there, right? Whenever you overboost these things, and you can actually, what happens is, these ring gaps right here will swell totally shut, and that will crack your piston. Now, a ringland is what these rings are resting in, these little gaps here. So my demise using the wrong size wastegate and overboosting caused a piston ring to swell pretty much totally shut, and it cracked the piston. So what you do is whenever you build an engine for boost, you simply just buy a new set of rings, you put them into the cylinders at a certain depth, and you regap them. Make those gaps bigger while they're compressed. BMW never designed this to be turbocharged from factory, hence they're just the standard ring gaps, or I forget what the factory spec is, but you want to gap those bigger because that right there is what your demise is. People who build these engines totally unopened and boost them, well, that wouldn't be a build. People who slap turbos on without opening the engine, doing the ring gaps, on 93 pump gas and high boost, you risk swelling that. It doesn't take much with heat to swell that shut and crack a piston. So that's the demise. However, these engines are very stout with boost, totally unopened. They use an MLS head gasket, multi-layer steel head gasket. Also, the stock head bolts are actually pretty strong. They clamp the head down really nicely. They're torque to yield, meaning they stretch a lot just to really clamp that head down. You can safely run 14 psi on your engine totally unopened. However, I would use E85 to keep those temperatures down in your combustion chambers, because 93, regular pump gas is going to burn a little hotter. That's what all comes down to, is these failures happening with these people while unopened. Those stock ring gaps, they will catch up to you. So this time around, with all the things that I've learned, I'll be using the right size wastegate. I'll be gapping my rings to accommodate for in case of boost creeping, so I can run higher boosts as well. We're going to be running a 2.0 liter crankshaft. As we all know, I love that crankshaft. It's forged, better high revving harmonics. And we're just going to, buy some rings and gap them, put some new bearings in it, and reassemble it. Now, the story behind this block. This block has come from a car that I named the Shop Mule, okay? The Shop Mule was a sight to be seen, guys. It was my second ever parts car I bought for parts. Obviously, that's what a parts car is, buying for parts. So, it was a 323i, so it already had a soft spot in my heart, as my first ever E46 is a 323i. This one right here. This is my first car that started everything for me, my business and everything. This car means a lot to me. It's my flagship car, okay? So, the Shop Mule being a 323i, I bought it with overheating condition, so I didn't want to totally lock it up, because back then I didn't have any hookups with the towing company, so I was forced to drive it here, right? And it having overheating issues, I wanted to baby it. Whenever it got hot, we stopped. Now, granted, the Shop Mule was only 14 miles from here, roughly. It took us 2.5 hours to get the Shop Mule here because it went to the red temperature gauge, just pegged to red super quick. I didn't want to totally seize her up, so I'd pull over, let it cool down, doing that on and off, depressurizing the cooling system. It was a long night, but we finally got it here. When we did, we thrashed her some. We gave the Shop Mule a little bit of thrashing. You know, he's a couple burnouts. It's a parts car at this point. It's got to have some fun, you know. We beat her up pretty good. So the Shop Mule came here, and the reason why it's called the Shop Mule was because I would pack parts in the back of her and move her around whenever I needed. You know, hence Shop Mule, like a mule. You pack it full of belongings with the pouches on it, and you ride it around, a little mule. So the Shop Mule would get packed full of parts and moved around wherever it had to. Because she would be parked right here outside of this garage bay. And what happened for that was, like, say I would have a pickup order for an engine. You know, an engine needs, you know, some room to be put into a back of a pickup truck. So I'd have an engine ready to go with a hoist. I'd have somebody with a truck just back in here. I'd put her in the bed of them. So, but to make that happen, we'd have to hop in the Shop Mule and fire it up and move it out of the way. Sounds easy enough, right? Well, keep in mind, the Shop Mule is a parts car, so parts got taken off of her. The Shop Mule never wanted to die. It was a bare necessity car that ran on pure hatred and just did not want to stop. It was a straight warrior. The Shop Mule had a heart. The Shop Mule had no charging system, no cooling system, no power steering, no evap components, lots of vacuum leaks. The throttle pedal, there wasn't one. At a certain point in time, the throttle pedal became a pair of vice grips slapped onto the throttle cable. So I was underneath the dash with one hand actuating the throttle, other hand on the steering wheel, trying to control the Shop Mule with no power steering. A lot of fun. Would move it down to the parking lot down there. And also, the exhaust of the Shop Mule, there was not any exhaust on the Shop Mule. The exhaust of the Shop Mule was literally an open cylinder head. So we had a fire-breathing, menace to society Shop Mule. No front end, no hood. Just a straight, just chaotic, loud beast. So, back to the overheating. The Shop Mule's head was warped so bad that during a cold start, you would see exhaust gases leaving the water pump port. When I say it had no cooling system, I meant it had no cooling system. Nothing at all, not even a freaking water pump. So, whenever it came time for the Shop Mule to get hauled away to the scrapyard, you know, it's a cycle of life. She's currently sitting in her dead spot. I'll show you guys her tomorrow in the next video. I'll show you what she looks like, okay? So, when it came time to get her ready for the scrapyard, I could not let her soul go with. So we removed the engine. The block turned out to be fine, not cracked or anything. The cylinder head, no cracks, just warped. She wants to keep going. Also, during disassembly of the engine, I found there to be at least easily a gallon of water in the crankcase. Once again, no hood and huge vacuum leaks and big ports left open. Water straight in. Shop Mule didn't care. It just still ran with a gallon of water. Still ran. I'm telling you, it did not care. So we drained all the water out of it. And what was left was a very nice prepared milkshake for me from none other than Mother Bavaria herself, saying thank you, keep the spirit going. I, however, politely declined the peanut butter milkshake as I changed my diet. That's what I said to her anyway. So yeah, I had an excuse not to drink the peanut butter milkshake. I politely declined. Hopefully she's not too mad at me. So yeah. The Shop Mule's heart is going to live on. The Shop Mule deserves it. The Shop Mule was a true warrior. Just straight Shop Mule, guys. Nothing else I can say. So as far as preparing these blocks for boost, okay, one of the first known weak points, this being aluminum, are going to be the threads for the head bolts. Especially if the engine was overheated, which the Shop Mule obviously was, with exhaust gases escaping out of the water pump port. During disassembly of an overheated engine of one of these, you will notice sometimes block material to literally stick to the head bolts during removal. That's a sign Definitely take care of that now before you go to retorque the head, because during retorquing, the head bolts will just pull the threads right out of the block. This being aluminum, if you get it hard enough, you actually ruin the temperament of the threads. So that was also a worry, but the threads were still fine. It was pretty crazy. I, however, obviously still, like I said, I inserted the block using methods by Tyler Davis at Metric Mechanic. I've mentioned them in the past. They are tried and tested high-performance engine builders for these cars. They specialize in inline sixes. The first things they do with these blocks on the stand, they drill and resert the block. I am a nutball, and I DIY drill and tap my own blocks. This is my third time doing this, and you'll see I get them pretty freaking straight because I've done it 3 times now. I'm not saying for you to try this. However, if you have the balls and are confident in yourself in drilling, I guess try it out. I, however, am not liable if you trash a block. But I will show you what they use at their shop. It's a very economical means of making things work. And some people like to frown upon it because they think it doesn't work. However, the same method I've done for this engine block in this car now, and it sealed up just fine. All compression numbers are steady, 180 across all cylinders. That's typically what I see with my compression tester, Bull Vari-Purse tester. And also has been through multiple heat cycles. It's fine. It sealed up fine because I stayed true to their methods and did their methods. All they use, this is where people start getting kind of worried. Literally just use a helicoil down on that block. Now, what's important is the size of this helicoil. This is not your typical 15 millimeter length. This is a 30 millimeter length, meaning it's going to take up a lot more threads inside of that block versus your standard 15 millimeter, right? So that's the first step, is to acquire the inserts themselves. They're just a standard stainless steel helicoil, M10 by 1.5 by 30. That's important. The size is by 30. That's the amount of threads you have. These are literally the same thread pitch as the stock head bolts. We're just refreshing the threads in the block. Now, this is where guys start freaking out. That's going to pull right out. That's not strong enough. We're getting to that. You also must pair this insert with the proper head bolts they use at Metric Mechanic. They use a simple 12-9 grade Allen head cap bolt. This is all it is, okay? This is no ARP fancy stuff, and this works, and they're race engines. This is a 12.9 grade Allen head cap bolt, black oxide coating, M10 by 1.5 by 110 millimeters. So it's the same specs as stock head bolt, just a different head on it. Now, there's no risk of pulling these out of the block because these get torqued to only 64 foot-pounds. Yes, you heard me correctly. Not 80, not 90, 64 foot-pounds, okay? These have a tensile strength of 170,000 PSI, meaning they are plenty capable of naturally aspirated and also boost applications. I'm not saying to throw 20 PSI at these guys boost-wise because I can't guarantee that. However, Tyler did reassure me that these will hold up just fine to boost, so I'm only foreseeing myself pushing 14 PSI with this engine with a 2.8 liter, meaning I should be over 400 easily horsepower, and that's reliably. But yes, using a 30 millimeter length insert, this cheap Allen head cap bolt, 12.9 tensile strength of 170,000 PSI, and by reusing the OEM head bolt washers, we have ourselves a nice economical means to sealing up the cylinder head with boost or NA. And as you'll see, try to get this on here with one hand. Fast forward to this. Not needed. Okay, there it is. And that's going to help just clamp the head down even more, right? You can't just use the bolt by itself. You'll crack the head. Reuse the stock washers. That's what he does at the shop over in Missouri. That's kind of cool. This block will also be going to a machine shop to get cleaned and decked. Since the shop mill did get very hot, you never know. It's very hard to actually warp a block, but you never know. I want it to be true. I want it to be nice and true. So we're going to get it decked and get this block clean, make it look brand new, right? Same thing with the cylinder head. I'm going to have him inspect it very closely. I didn't see any cracks, but maybe he'll see some at the machine shop. If it passes, clean and decked. So we have nice flat surfaces on both ends of the spectrum here, so we get a nice cylinder seal. When it comes to the bottom end, we'll spin this around real quick. Move this out of the way. We'll spin it around. You'll see the bottom workings. Here's where the crankshaft lives in these blocks. These are your spots for your main bearing caps. Bink, 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 bink. Whenever you're disassembling an engine at this point, you do not want to mix up your main bearing caps because from factory all those years ago, these engines get what's called a line bore hone with a big line hone with the caps in one specific order, in one direction. So you cannot mix these up, preferably, unless you are getting the block rehoned anyway. what I've noticed on E46 engines is they have these numbered for you, so you can't really mix them up. There's going to be small engraved numbers. This is obviously number 1. You can see the number 1. This will focus right there. That's a 1. They have 1 through 5 numbered. That's all you really need, because the 6th one is the thrust bearing, so you can't mix that one up because it's a certain size. So you not only can't mix them up number-wise, you also can't mix them up by flipping them like this. I remember that these bigger numbers, which are protruding from the surface of the main bearing cap, that they face the oil filter housing side. So it goes back in one way and one order only. And also another key point is, which sounds kind of sacrilegious, honestly, it is very common with BMW engines that these main bearings hold up very, very, very well. And I've seen guys actually reuse main bearings, even after high mileage. For instance, keep in mind, shop mule was a warrior. 207,000 miles, cold start red lines, and severely overheating. These are the main bearings from factory after 207,000 miles. Check this out. They are hardly even worn. Granted, this is this would be the way we're looking at this would be one of the bottom shells, but when the engine's orientated properly, this would be a non-weight bearing bearing. However, you can even see at that mileage, it's just crazy. You can now see why people resort to reusing these. These are very good quality bearings from factory. So we'll then go to more of a weight bearing side, which I have one right here. Once again, you'll just see that, if anything, just the very first layers wore away after 22 years and millions of revolutions, how good of quality these bearings are from BMW. So like I said, people will just simply reuse these main bearings from factory, even after high mileage. There's your proof. I, however, am going to just buy new, because some of these bearings do catch your fingernail. That is usually whenever you want to draw the line. If you clean one of these off and run your fingernail across the bearing, if you can feel any of the ridges, you'd want to buy new bearings, because that could potentially score or polish your crank in not a good way. It will burn up and score a crank badly. So we're just going to get new bearings. They're like $105 from Glyco, which are good bearings. We're also going to buy new rod bearings from Glyco. These see a lot more rotational mass, as they're spinning independently on part of the crankshaft. So we would want to replace these regardless. If you ever reuse your main bearings, I won't say a word, because like you've seen here, the quality is very high from factory. They last a long time. People have reused them, and builds have no problems at all. Also, whenever it comes to the main bearing cap bolts, you can also reuse these. They are technically a torque to yield bolt. However, they get reused, like hundreds upon hundreds of builds for BMWs, because they're fine. And also what we have here is we have some plastic. Move this away. We have some plastic gauge, and this is to measure the clearance whenever it comes to reassembly. So you'll have your new bearings in here. If you're using your OEM, no need to spec them out, because all these years they're fine. They were spec from factory. But if you're buying new main bearings, you put your bottom shells in, lay your crank in, before you put your main bearing caps on, there's a piece of like plastic in here. It's called plastic gauge. It's like a little plastic string. See that? You will cut sections of that. You'll lay them on your crankshaft, put the main bearing caps in, torque them down to spec, take the caps back off. Then you use the imprinted gauge on here, and you'll see how much this string got smashed. And that's how you know what your bearing clearances are. I'll show you how to do that whenever the time comes. I'll probably be ordering new bearings soon. I, however, just ordered more parts for this car. So, obviously got this refreshed and rebuilt and everything that was discussed in the last video. I just recently ordered a brand new strut brace for here, which also ties to the subframe, and also ordered front reinforcement plates, because you also want to reinforce the top of the subframe mounts in the cabin. Future discussion, okay? We're discussing engines right now. But yeah, I'll show you how to properly test your bearing clearances, make sure you're good to go. I've seen guys slap these together with new bearings and without testing their clearances. Don't do that. It's not worth potentially ruining a crank. Yes, Glyco is pretty good with their quality control and bearing tolerances. However, you really want to check your bearing clearances. And as far as the turbo placement, I'll be going with a bottom mount setup versus my last setup, which was top mount. The top mount is nice for serviceability of the turbo. It's right on top, easy to get to. However, a downfall of that is going to be severe heat soaking, and also a disadvantage to center of gravity being up here. We're going to go bottom mount for center of gravity, as you're now bringing that weight to more center of the car and lower. It also leads to better heat dissipation in the engine bay. And there's other benefits to the bottom mount as well. The only downfall is, once again, is serviceability. You're going to have to get underneath the car to service the turbo, which is no big deal, obviously. But yeah, bottom mount is a way to go for sure, at least in my opinion. I'll be using just a typical cast iron bottom mount turbo manifold. I'll be getting it modified, and I'll be modifying it myself, and then probably getting it Cerakoted by the same guy who does all my powder coating, as you have seen in the previous videos. So that's something to be looking out for. I'm very excited because this time as a whole, I am more knowledgeable on this platform, as my first ever turbo videos on this engine and stuff like that, they weren't vastly knowledgeable. However, I did have some good points for you. I'm more confident in myself this time, knowing how to prevent the failures, so looking forward to showing you guys the process. Just do not fret if the videos for turbocharging are kind of spanned out, as it is not top priority to get this engine ready. The top priority is to get this car as a whole ready, because this car's been here 3 years now. This being my baby, I wanted to do everything at once. The interior, exterior, suspension, driveline, pretty much everything in one shot. The ultimate goal is to literally have the engine as the only serviceable item. So if the engine goes easily one day in and out, as I've pulled a lot of engines from these cars so far, so I can literally have an engine removed and installed in one day. If the engine goes, I won't even care at that point. As long as the rest of the car holds up, I'll be happy. So hopefully you guys like this content, enjoy learning things. Hopefully you guys learn something, whether it even just be, gapping your rings or whatever. I like to inform you guys of new information. If you would not mind, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe to my channel. It is all I ask for in return of my time for making these videos for you. So until next time, I see you guys later. Have yourselves a good one.